Welcome back to Dungeon Brew. We are on our series of narrative design, and today we're talking about narrative content design specifically, so stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Today we're talking about narrative content design. If you recall, TTRPGs are very narrative in nature, so it's very important for GMs to understand narrative design so that they can really bring their game to life for the characters. Josh, why don't you start with telling us what narrative content design actually is?
Yeah, last week we talked about narrative system design, which has a lot to do with the reactions that happen in the world based on the choices that your characters make and the decisions that they make. Today we're going to be talking about the content design. Now, I think when most people think about content, they're thinking about the development of quests and backstories and histories and towns and vignettes, the descriptive pieces that go into the game, and all that's very true. But I also think that it has to do primarily with accounting for the series of choices the player makes. In other words, making sure that the plot continues to progress and move forward no matter what your characters choose to do. It's making sure that they're able to continue to advance in the game, even if they try to break it.
Yeah. So they're like taking all the information, all the content of the system design, and they're actually incorporating it into the quests and into the towns and the backstories of your characters. They're creating the story itself with that system design in mind. And it's all about kind of mapping out the journey with that content that you have and keeping in mind the content that you have to prepare what that gamer or player is going to see next.
Yeah, I love that terminology, mapping out the journey, because that's very much how I think of it. There's video games that do this. I think there's some that are very popular in doing this. Specifically, I'm thinking of like the Telltale games. So you have things like The Walking Dead and the Game of Thrones game and The Wolf Among Us, where they have these stories that are being told, where you have choices that are made throughout those stories, and you find that you're always kind of being pushed back to the plot line. So if I choose X at this point, at this plot point in the story, I may go through a series of events and then I have choice Y down here. Or I could have chosen choice Y here and went down this different path. But the story is always intact and always moving forward. Now, those are kind of limited, I think, just because of them being a video game. And so they kind of have to kind of force you. Sometimes it feels like you're being strong-armed into a particular plot line or storyline. But that's what they're attempting to do. And TTRPGs are that same way. It's being able to keep players moving forward on quest lines and through the story, despite what choices that are being made.
Yeah, so like with video games, it's kind of like you have the extent of the world that's given to you of all the design that's there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll have the NPCs that, they seem to just say the same thing,
Yeah.
so that you can't really go against the storyline. And so you kind of are forced to go, like you said, strong-armed into something. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you handle that as a GM when your players are just kind of not sticking to the story and they want to go beyond the storyline? How far does a GM expand really?
Yeah, I think this is the beauty of TTRPGs, to be honest, is that our narrative content design is always in play. It's not something that we create, before session zero and just hope that it sticks for the next 6 months, year, 2 years of playing the game. We're always having to revisit the content and seeing how we need to adjust it. Because in a TTRPG, the story, as we mentioned in our first video, is collaborative in nature. We're telling this story together. So I may have come into the campaign as the GM with this idea, this concept. It's like, oh, I want my players to go do X. I want them to go save the princess in the castle far, far away. That's what we're going to be doing. But during the course of storytelling, I find that not everyone around the table is really down with that story. And collaboratively, they want to tell a different story. So you may have a conversation about where they want to take the game and what they want to do. And then I have to go back to the drawing table and build that out. Or, maybe it's just adjusting it in small intervals if maybe not everybody's on board with not saving the princess. But the point of the matter is that you can change the content and the way that it's delivered based on how the story is being told and adjust it to everyone else. I think the key piece, which goes back to the system design that we talked about last week, is making sure that there's real consequences to those contingencies. So if they're not saving the princess and they decide to go start off a seafaring, trade and get enough money to build strongholds and attack the local populace and become rulers themselves, there may be consequences from the king who they promised they'd save his daughter. They may be engaging in nefarious activities as murder hobos, and it's going to alert the local magistrate and have them send guards and other bands of heroes to come after them and attack them. So you can then change the content and the direction of the plot based on the choices that they make that are very real in nature. You can't do that in a video game.
Mm-hmm.
I can't escape Westeros. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking it's really like, I guess with D&D, they're the only limitation would come down to what the DM can come with, or the GM can come up with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, I think I might be realizing a total failure of content design in Skyrim. There was this one time that I played the game where I had to do this quest, and I accidentally, if I remember right, I killed someone, or no, I think I gave a letter to somebody at the wrong point between
Mm-hmm.
quests or something, and I ended up getting trapped in the castle that I was
Yeah.
supposed to be at. It was that quest that in Skyrim that has to do with it's like some ball or some party that you have to go to. And I got stuck in the castle and there was nowhere to go. So I had to I really actually had to restart the game because it was
Mm-hmm.
almost like it was a bug or a glitch or something where the design there, the things that the characters were saying, was not allowing me to get out of that castle or to move even towards a different quest or anything. I was literally
Mm-hmm.
stuck there. So I'm like, that I guess would be a good example of content design failure, I
Yeah, content
guess.
design failure, which I will say, I love a good video game, but I think that is one of the greatest limitations of playing in video games is that you hit glitches or bugs that stop the plot thread, that allow you not to go
Mhm.
any further. And if you've had a quick save or you've deleted your previous saves and you can't go back, you're stuck and you have to start the game all over again. And that is super
Yeah.
frustrating. As a GM in a TTRPG, you don't have that problem. Let's say that I have a merchant that has a quest that he's going to give you because his wife is, kidnapped by kobolds in a local cavern or something, and you come in and the barbarian kills that merchant before he gives out the quest because he didn't like the deal that he was getting on his greaves, and so he's murdered. Well, that's fine because maybe they had children. And now I have a poor orphan boy who's going to give you the quest to go save his mother because his poor merchant father was murdered on the streets. So it's like a chessboard where I have elements. I have caves that weren't explored, NPCs that weren't engaged with, letters that weren't delivered. And I can move those chess pieces around on my board to different places down the story so that players still have options for those plot threads,
Hmm.
which is a lot of
God, when I
fun.
think about where the mind of the GM really has to have all these people, like I personally would never be able to do something like that. Your mind has to be expansive to be able to move all those pieces into, it's like you have to be able to see a little into the future too. Well, if they're going to go in this direction, then
Mm-hmm.
what content do I have to use here to continue the story along while keeping that suspension of disbelief? Because I think that's where suspension of disbelief really comes in when it comes to any sort of gaming, and especially, I mean, with D&D, you'd think that I mean, you have to keep to the original laws, religions of the system
Mm-hmm.
content. Because if you don't, then you're going to have your suspension of disbelief and be like, well, I thought that these were the rules. Well, I thought this was
Mm-hmm.
how the town works, or the specific, the laws in the specific place are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
Well, I was going to say that
yeah,
the really nice thing about this, which we talked about this some in the system design video about what tools or what mechanics can be built into the game so that you can measure the reactions of the world. In narrative
Mhm.
content design, you also have tools that are built into the game to help you track all of those things that are changing for the story elements so that you don't have to remember all of them in your head. You can kind of refer back and see what's going on. And this is primarily done qualitatively in game, where you have the players who are sharing the storytelling with you around the board take on certain roles like the chronicler and the mapper and the quartermaster and the treasurer, and they're tracking the riches that you're gaining, the quests that they're choosing, the decisions that are being made, where they've traveled throughout the world, all the interactions. And so you have like this history log to look through to see where the thread has been so you can have a better idea of where it's going to go. And it's really helpful as a GM to have everyone around the table on board to fulfill those roles so that you have really great narrative content ongoing throughout the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we want to dive too much into this because we're going to have videos later where we're talking about all of these in details, how to build quests, how to build NPCs, how to write a good vignette and good descriptive pieces, how to keep that plot thread going. So anything else you want to add on this before we let them go?
No, I think we covered it without having to dive into the other stuff because the other stuff I think is that nitty-gritty, the fun stuff that I don't want to, leave anybody on a cliffhanger.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.